Nobody in that Seoul office knew that the quiet woman with the small leather notebook was about to turn their entire world upside down. She had flown in from Lagos carrying a mission, a secret, and the kind of calm that only truly dangerous people possess. She was not here to make friends. She was here to find the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, was going to cost one very talented, very arrogant young manager everything he thought he had built. Adesola Okonkwo was 24 years old, Lagos-born, sharp-minded, and the kind of woman who absorbed information the way dry soil absorbs rain, quietly, completely, and with purpose. She had grown up watching her father, Chief Emeka Okonkwo, build Okonkwo Global from a single, modest import business into a powerful enterprise that stretched across multiple continents. She studied business and international relations, returned home with a degree and a hunger, and began working inside the company immediately, not coasting on her last name, but pushing against it, determined to earn every room she walked into. So when her father called her into his private office one evening, closed the door, and slid a thick folder across the mahogany desk, Adesola did not flinch. The folder was about KO Link Solutions, their sole subsidiary, and the news inside it was not good. Staff turnover had spiked without explanation. Quarterly productivity figures had dropped 3 periods in a row. The local management team in Seoul kept submitting reports that were clean, professional, and entirely useless, full of careful language that explained nothing and revealed even less. Something was deeply wrong inside that office, and nobody in Lagos could see it clearly from the outside. Chief Emeka Okonkwo needed someone on the ground, someone unknown, someone who would not be handled carefully or shown a polished version of reality simply because of the name they carried. He needed someone who could walk in unnoticed, observe without interference, and report back the unfiltered truth before the company's quarterly board review. He looked at his daughter across the desk and did not need to say another word. Adesola flew into Incheon Airport on a gray, cold Tuesday morning under the name Ada Echo, registered through a temporary staffing agency as a brand new junior intern. She checked into a plain apartment in the Mapo district, nothing close to what her family name could have afforded, and spent her first evening on foot, walking the neighborhood streets, eating fish cake skewers from a street cart, letting the city introduce itself to her on its own terms. Seoul was striking and relentless. Neon signs glowed against the overcast sky. People moved through the streets with a focused urgency that reminded her, oddly, of Lagos, 2 cities that looked nothing alike but shared the same heartbeat of people who had places to be and no patience for standing still. She wrote her first observations in the notebook that night, sitting by the window of her small apartment. The energy of the city, the layout of the KO Link building she had already walked past twice, and a single line she underlined twice: "Watch before you speak, always." By her second morning inside KO Link, she already knew the reports had been lying, not through dramatic discovery, but through the small, telling details that a trained eye catches and an honest mind refuses to ignore. Workers moved through the office corridors with their shoulders drawn inward. Conversations dropped in volume whenever a manager appeared in the open workspace. A young woman at the printing station knocked a stack of papers to the floor and visibly tensed before a single person had reacted, the reflex of someone who had been made to feel that small mistakes carried large consequences. The office was clean, organized, and professionally decorated. It was also a place where people were afraid, and fear had been there long enough to become ordinary. Adesola said nothing. She filed reports, completed small assigned tasks, asked questions that sounded casual but were anything but, and wrote everything down. She understood something that many people in leadership positions spend entire careers missing, that the most important information in any organization is never in the formal reports. It lives in the pauses, in the body language, in what people choose not to say when someone with authority is nearby. She was gathering all of it, piece by careful piece, and she was prepared to be patient. What she was not prepared for was Park Ji-hoon. Park Ji-hoon was 26 years old, the youngest senior manager KO Link Solutions had ever promoted, and by any reasonable measure, one of the most capable people in that building. His mind worked in systems. He could look at a broken process the way a mechanic looks at a stalled engine, tracing backward from the symptom to the source with a precision that his colleagues quietly respected, even when professional rivalry prevented them from saying so out loud. He had earned his position through 5 years of relentless, focused work, staying late when others left, volunteering for the difficult projects, and consistently delivering results that made his supervisors look good. He was proud of what he had built. He carried that pride everywhere, and like most things carried too tightly for too long, it had begun to change shape into something heavier. The week Adesuwa arrived at KO Link was the worst week of Ji-hoon's professional life. His team had missed a critical client delivery deadline, not through negligence, but because a key supplier had failed without warning, a factor entirely outside anyone's control. But the client did not particularly care about factors outside anyone's control, and neither, it turned out, did Ji-hoon's director. The meeting upstairs had been the kind of quiet, politely worded conversation that leaves no visible marks, but lands with the weight of a public humiliation. His director's voice had remained perfectly even throughout. That had somehow made it worse. Ji-hoon walked out of that meeting with his expression composed and his confidence fractured, and spent the rest of the morning trying to hold himself together in front of a team that was already anxious and watching him for signs of how badly things had gone. He was standing in the middle of the open workspace floor, sorting through documents he was not really reading, when he noticed the intern, Ada, sitting calmly at a corner desk in the restricted management section, a specific desk his director had told him to keep clear for incoming documentation from the overseas head office. She was writing in that small notebook she always seemed to be carrying, completely relaxed, completely unbothered, as though she belonged there and never considered the possibility that she did not. Ji-hoon did not walk to the HR desk to verify whether they had reassigned her seating. He did not lower his voice or find a private moment to address the issue quietly. He had spent the entire morning swallowing his frustration in front of his director. And here, on his own floor, in front of his own colleagues, was a moment where he could exercise authority cleanly and without argument. He walked across the floor, and the workspace went quiet the way open offices do when something is about to happen that everyone will be talking about afterward. He told himself he had handled it. He reorganized the documents on his desk. He answered 2 emails. He avoided looking at the colleagues who were very carefully not looking at him. And then, at 7 that evening, an email arrived in his inbox from the Okonkwo Global Head Office in Lagos. A new overseas director had been formally appointed to lead the KO Link Solutions operational review. Her name was Adesuwa Okonkwo. There was a professional photograph included in the announcement. Ji-hoon opened it. He sat completely still for a very long time. The woman in the photograph was Ada. Ji-hoon closed his laptop. He sat in the dark of his office and understood, with the specific and merciless clarity that arrives only after it is too late, exactly what he had done. She arrived the next morning at precisely 9 o'clock, and the entire office felt it before she reached the conference room. Word had moved through KO Link the way significant news always moves through a workplace, in fragments, through glances, in the particular tension that settles over a building when something irreversible is about to be acknowledged out loud. Staff who had witnessed what happened on the floor the day before had spent the evening exchanging messages. Those who had not witnessed it had been told by those who had. By the time Adesuwa walked through the glass entrance doors, everyone in that building knew her name and was waiting to see what she would do with the power she was carrying. She wore a structured Ankara print blazer over a crisp white shirt, her natural hair framed around her face with the kind of effortless confidence that cannot be taught or imitated. She carried the Okonkwo Global folder against her side like it had always belonged there. She greeted the receptionist by her first name because she had made it her business to learn everyone's names during her week as Ada. Small detail, significant signal. She walked to the large conference room on the third floor, set her folder on the table at the head of the room, and waited. When the senior staff filed in
서울에서의
and Ji-hoon
글로벌
took his
전략
seat 3 places from the
업데이트입니다.
head of the table, his
중요한
face was composed in the
시점입니다.
way that people
예상
compose their
수익은
faces when they have made peace with
20%
an
성장
outcome they cannot
예상됩니다.
change. He had drafted a resignation
경쟁사
letter on his
동향은
phone during the commute. He was prepared to be removed professionally and quietly. What he was not prepared for was Adesua telling the room the truth. All of it, with the same directness she had carried since the moment she arrived in Seoul. She explained the undercover assignment without apology or dramatics. She described what she had observed about the company culture in plain, precise language. She addressed what had happened on the floor the previous morning openly, because it had occurred openly, and she believed that things done publicly deserved to be acknowledged publicly. Then she placed a single sheet of paper in front of Ji-hoon and said something that nobody in that room expected. She told him that his work history was strong, that his logistics restructuring proposal from the previous year had delivered measurable savings to the company, that yesterday, under significant personal and professional pressure, he had made a poor decision, and that one poor decision did not cancel 5 years of genuine contribution. She offered him 2 weeks to submit a serious, honest plan addressing KO Link's 3 most critical operational problems, a plan that demonstrated real understanding of what was broken and what it would take to fix it. If the plan was credible, his position was secure, and his name would go into her board report as an asset worth investing in. Ji-hoon looked at the paper. He looked at her. He picked up a pen and accepted without negotiating. The 2 weeks that followed were some of the most demanding and clarifying either of them had experienced. Their evening review sessions began formally and became progressively more honest as the work deepened. Ji-hoon learned what directness meant in a Nigerian professional context, that naming a problem clearly and without decoration was a form of respect, an assumption that the other person was strong enough to hear the truth. Adesua learned what measured communication meant in a Korean professional context, that careful, considered language was sometimes not evasion, but a genuine attempt to preserve dignity while delivering difficult information. They misread each other with some regularity. On the eighth evening, they disagreed sharply enough that both voices rose, and then both people stopped and chose honesty over ego, chose explaining rather than defend. The plan that emerged from that conversation was better than anything either of them would have constructed alone. The cultural difference that looked like an obstacle had become, in practice, the most useful tool they had. Ji-hoon presented his completed plan on a Friday morning, 2 weeks after Adesua had placed that single sheet of paper in front of him, and he presented it the way he had come to understand she would respect, without softening, without performance, without the kind of polished language that makes problems sound smaller than they are. His first proposal was a restructured feedback system, anonymous and accessible to every level of staff, designed specifically to dismantle the culture of silence that Adesua had identified in her very first days as Ada. His second proposal was a cross-cultural integration program built directly from the conversations and misunderstandings and eventual breakthroughs he and Adesua had navigated together across 2 weeks of late evenings and honest disagreement. His third proposal was a management accountability framework that shifted how leaders at KO Link were evaluated, away from individual image and toward measurable team outcomes, so that the pressure that had turned Ji-hoon into someone he was not proud of could not quietly build inside another manager without anyone noticing. Adesua asked him 4 direct questions in front of the assembled senior staff. He answered all 4 without hesitation and without deflection. When the meeting concluded and the room emptied, she found him sitting alone in the small park across the street from the KO Link building, on a bench that caught the afternoon light through old trees. She sat beside him and told him that the feedback system proposal was the strongest element of the plan. He told her the cross-cultural program had been constructed from their arguments. Neither of them said the other thing that was present between them, the thing that had been building quietly through 2 weeks of shared work and honest conversation. But it was there, and they were both self-aware enough to know it and responsible enough to not rush it. Adasua's final report to the Okonkwo Global Board was the most truthful document she had ever written professionally. She described the company's failures without minimizing them, and the path to recovery without overstating it. Ji-hoon's name appeared 4 times in that report, and every mention was specific and earned. 6 months after her initial arrival in Seoul, the KO Link performance numbers began to turn meaningfully. The feedback system surfaced 3 significant operational problems within the first quarter that previous management had either missed or chosen to ignore. The cross-cultural program became something other Okonkwo Global subsidiaries formally requested. Ji-hoon was promoted to Regional Operations Director and delivered a speech at the announcement that was notably short, notably honest, and notably unlike the man who had once fired an intern in front of a silent floor to protect his ego from a bad week. On a quiet Saturday morning, months after the board review, with no company titles or professional obligations between them, Ji-hoon and Adasua walked along the Han River as the city moved around them. He had been practicing his Yoruba with the same systematic determination he applied to everything. She had been learning that patience, held long enough and honestly enough, eventually stops feeling like waiting and starts feeling like peace. The small leather notebook was in his jacket pocket, the one she had carried through her first week as Ada, the one he had returned to her with an inscription on her first departure back to Lagos. He had added a second line during the months since, in Yoruba, that was imperfect and entirely sincere. When she read it on the riverbank that morning, she did not laugh at the spelling. She read it twice, then she folded the notebook closed, held it against her chest for a moment, and took his hand. The story of Adasua and Ji-hoon is not at its core about the drama of a power reveal, though that moment was real and earned and changed everything that followed. It is about what two people choose to do after the dramatic moment passes, whether they use power to punish or to build, whether they treat difference as a wall or a doorway, whether they are willing to be honest about who they are, what they want, and what they are still learning. That choice, made quietly, repeatedly, without an audience, is where character actually lives. It is where every meaningful story does. If this story challenged the way you think about leadership, culture, or the assumptions we make about people before we know their full story, this is your sign to share it. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever misjudged someone completely, only to realize they were exactly what the situation needed? Subscribe so you never miss the next story. And if you want Adesua and Ji-hoon's journey told scene by scene in full, tell us in the comments. Every share, every comment, every subscription is what turns a story outline into a full series.